Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to the bustling, dusty, and surprisingly sleepless world of ancient Rome. Imagine yourself there, walking the cobblestone streets as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the Forum. The sounds of the city are slowly dimming, but not entirely fading. You hear the distant murmur of voices, the clatter of a cart, perhaps even the faint roar of a lion from the arena, still a few hours from its evening show. You're navigating these ancient pathways, trying to find some peace, some quiet, some relief from the incessant hum of imperial life. You see the grand villas of the elite, their windows aglow with oil lamps, hinting at the lives of luxury within. But even amidst such splendor, a good night's sleep wasn't always a given, especially if you happen to be the most powerful person in the known world. You probably won't survive a single night trying to sleep like an emperor. The pressures alone would have you tossing and turning for weeks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to imagine all of us, scattered across the globe, sharing this quiet moment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going to pull back the silken drapes on the imperial bedchambers, those inner sanctums where even the most powerful Romans wrestled with the age-old problem of how to actually get some decent rest. You might think that being an emperor meant you could simply command sleep to arrive, much like you'd command a legion or a new aqueduct. But alas, even absolute power couldn't conquer the stubborn beast of insomnia. For the emperors, sleep wasn't just a personal comfort, it was a matter of state. A well-rested emperor was, presumably, a clear-headed emperor, less prone to making rash decisions that could ripple across an entire empire. So what did they do? You see, the Romans, despite their practical nature, often had a flair for the dramatic, even in their bedrooms. The very architecture of their sleeping quarters could be quite elaborate. Imagine walls adorned with frescoes depicting tranquil scenes, perhaps a pastoral landscape or a serene seascape, designed to soothe the mind rather than stimulate it. You might find yourself drifting off under a ceiling painted with constellations, as if you were sleeping directly under the vast Roman night sky. The Romans had a fairly straightforward understanding of the basic needs for sleep: darkness, quiet, and a comfortable place to lie down. But their interpretation of comfortable might surprise you. While we envision plush mattresses, a Roman bed was often a simple wooden frame, sometimes inlaid with bronze or ivory, topped with straps woven across to support a mattress. And what was that mattress filled with? Well, it varied. The common folk might have straw or reeds, but the emperors, naturally, had something a bit more luxurious. Think wool, feathers, or even dried leaves that had been carefully prepared. Sometimes, they even used animal skins, though that might be a bit too rustic for our modern sensibilities. The pillows, too, were often filled with soft down or wool. It sounds rather nice, doesn't it? Like a very early, very fancy camping trip. One mainstream historical fact about Roman sleep habits is that they often practiced a form of polyphasic sleep, not unlike a siesta. They might have slept in two shifts, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in between. This wasn't necessarily a sign of insomnia, but a common practice for many people, especially before the advent of artificial lighting truly made long, continuous nights of activity feasible. It was a rhythm dictated by the sun and the flicker of oil lamps. This meant an emperor might attend to some correspondence, read, or even entertain guests during that waking interlude. It puts a whole new spin on working from home, doesn't it? Now for a quirky tidbit. Some emperors were known to have elaborate mechanisms to ensure darkness. We're talking about heavy, multiple layers of thick fabric drapes, sometimes even reinforced shutters, designed to block out every last glimmer of light. It was less about modern blackout curtains and more about creating a tomb-like stillness. Historians still argue whether this was primarily for comfort or if it also served as a security measure, making it harder for unwanted visitors to sneak in unnoticed. Imagine an emperor, perhaps old and weary, demanding absolute darkness, meticulously sealed off from the outside world, just hoping for a few hours of unbroken slumber. You can almost hear the soft rustle of the heavy drapes as they were drawn shut, one by one, sealing you into a cocoon of night. Beyond the elaborate bedchambers, the imperial struggle with insomnia often led directly to the dining table. You might think that a good meal before bed would be just the ticket for a peaceful night, but for Roman emperors, their diet could be a significant contributor to their sleeplessness. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer opulence of an imperial banquet. You're not just having a light snack. You're indulging in multiple courses, rich sauces, exotic spices, and copious amounts of wine. It was a feast designed to impress, to display wealth and power, but perhaps not to induce a gentle drift into dreamland. Consider the sheer variety of food consumed. The Romans were quite fond of their garum, a fermented fish sauce that was a staple condiment, used on almost everything. While it added a pungent flavor to their dishes, it was also incredibly salty, and high sodium intake isn't exactly a recipe for a restful night. Then there were the rich, fatty meats, often roasted or stewed for hours, followed by heavy desserts. Your stomach, much like a Roman citizen after a long speech, would be working overtime to process all that richness. It's no wonder indigestion might have been a common bedtime companion for the emperors. The Romans also had a peculiar fondness for certain food items that, by modern standards, might seem odd additions to a pre-sleep menu. Dormice, for instance, were considered a delicacy, often fattened in special jars and served as an appetizer. You're trying to wind down, and suddenly you're faced with a plate of roasted, plump dormice. It certainly adds a unique flavor to your evening, but perhaps not the one conducive to a gentle descent into sleep. And let's not forget the wine. While a single glass might relax you, Roman banquets involved amphora after amphora of often potent vintages. Historians still argue whether the quality of Roman wine was consistently high enough to avoid a truly debilitating hangover, which certainly wouldn't help with sleep. You can almost feel the pounding headache from here, can't you? A headache that probably lasted well into the next day's Senate meeting. One mainstream historical fact is that the Romans understood the concept of humors in the body and believed certain foods could either balance or unbalance these humors, affecting one's health and, by extension, their sleep. If your humors were out of whack due to diet, you might find yourself more prone to agitation or restlessness. So, a Roman physician might prescribe a specific diet to an insomniac emperor, not just for general health, but with the explicit goal of improving their sleep. It was an early form of dietary medicine, though perhaps lacking the scientific rigor we associate with it today. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to have specific sleep snacks or bedtime drinks, though not always with the desired effect. One emperor, whose name is lost to the sleepy mists of history, was rumored to drink warm milk infused with poppy seeds, hoping for a sedative effect. Now, while poppy seeds do contain trace amounts of opiates, it's unlikely a simple infusion would have had the same powerful effect as, say, a modern sleep aid. It was more akin to a calming ritual, perhaps, than a guaranteed knockout. Imagine the imperial chef nervously preparing this concoction, hoping it would finally grant his emperor some peace. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite truly understood the direct correlation between overeating and poor sleep, or if they simply viewed indigestion as a separate ailment. They might have seen a rich meal and a restless night as two distinct problems, rather than cause and effect. You, however, are now much wiser. You know that third helping of roasted dormice might not be the best idea if you're aiming for uninterrupted slumber. You can almost hear your stomach groaning in protest, a gentle rumble that echoes through the vast imperial dining hall. It's a reminder that even emperors, with all their power, couldn't escape the basic biological realities of a full belly and a restless mind. Having navigated the treacherous culinary landscape of an imperial banquet, you might assume that a Roman emperor's next stop for sleep would be the serene embrace of a bath. And you'd be right, partly. The Roman baths were indeed central to daily life, offering not just cleanliness, but also a social hub and, often, a pathway to relaxation. Imagine stepping into the warmth, the steam gently rising, the sounds of splashing water and murmuring voices creating a soft, enveloping hum. For an emperor, this wasn't just a trip to the local spa. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to soothe both body and mind, hopefully paving the way for a good night's rest. The standard Roman bathing ritual typically began in the apoditerium, the changing room, where you'd shed your toga and prepare yourself. Then, often, you'd move to the tepidarium, a warm, humid room designed to help you acclimatize and gently sweat. You can almost feel the gentle heat seeping into your muscles, loosening the tension from a long day of imperial decree-making. This was often followed by the caldarium, the hot room, where the air was thick with steam, and you might scrape your skin with a strigil to remove dirt and sweat, a surprisingly satisfying, if perhaps a bit abrasive, ritual. Finally, the refreshing plunge into the frigidarium, the cold bath, a shock to the system, but one believed to invigorate and close the pores. For an emperor, however, these steps could be far more elaborate. Private baths within the palace were common, offering solitude and luxury. Instead of a bustling public bath, you might have had a small, exquisitely tiled room, perhaps with perfumed oils diffusing into the air. Slaves would attend to your every need, offering massages with fragrant oils, applying soothing lotions, and even performing light stretches to ease tired limbs. It was less a quick dip and more a prolonged, almost meditative experience. The idea was to cleanse the body, yes, but also to calm the spirit, to wash away the anxieties of ruling an empire. One mainstream historical fact about Roman baths is their sophisticated heating system, the hypocaust. This involved raising the floor on pillars and running hot air from a furnace underneath, heating the room from below. This ingenious engineering allowed for consistently warm environments, creating the perfect conditions for relaxation. You can almost feel the warmth radiating up through the mosaic tiles, a truly luxurious sensation that would lull you into a state of tranquility. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to have extremely specific temperature preferences for their bathwater, sometimes even dictating the exact measurements of hot and cold water to be mixed. It was said that one emperor, possibly Caracalla, was so particular that his bath attendants lived in constant fear of getting the temperature wrong, a misstep that could result in severe punishment, or at least a very grumpy sovereign. Imagine the pressure, trying to get that water just right, knowing your emperor's sleep, and perhaps your own well-being, depended on it. Historians still argue whether the frigidarium, the cold plunge, was always considered beneficial for sleep, or if its invigorating effect sometimes counteracted the relaxation achieved in the warmer rooms. Some ancient texts suggest it was seen as a way to close the pores and prevent chills, which might have been thought to aid overall health and thus sleep. But it's not quite the warm bath we associate with bedtime routines today, is it? Perhaps it was a case of invigorate now, sleep later, hoping the body would eventually crash from the exertion of dealing with such extremes. You emerge from the bath, feeling thoroughly cleansed, perhaps a bit lightheaded from the heat and then the cold, hoping your exhausted body will simply give in to the sweet embrace of slumber. The distant sounds of the city, now softened by the thick walls of your palace, seem to fade further as you prepare to recline. Emerging from the tranquil, if somewhat extreme, temperatures of the imperial bath, you might now turn to the learned minds of the era for a more scientific approach to your sleepless nights. This is where figures like Galen, the preeminent physician of the Roman world, entered the picture, bringing his vast, though sometimes erroneous, medical knowledge to bear on the problem of imperial insomnia. Imagine him, a man of immense intellect and even greater confidence, observing you, charting your humors, and dispensing advice with an air of absolute authority. Galen, whose influence on Western medicine lasted for over a millennium, believed deeply in the humoral theory, a concept you might remember from earlier. This theory posited that the body was composed of four primary fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that an imbalance in these humors led to illness, including sleep disturbances. If you, as emperor, were suffering from insomnia, Galen might diagnose an excess of black bile, leading to melancholy and restlessness, or perhaps an imbalance of hot and cold humors that prevented true relaxation. It's a holistic approach, certainly, but one rooted in a different understanding of physiology than our own. So, what remedies would Galen prescribe? He wasn't one for simple solutions. His treatments often involved complex preparations, drawing from a vast pharmacopoeia of herbs, minerals, and even animal parts. For insomnia, He might recommend specific dietary changes, perhaps steering you away from those rich, garum-laden banquets and towards lighter, more cooling foods. He might also suggest a series of gentle purges to rebalance the humors, which sounds less like a relaxing evening routine and more like a very uncomfortable night. Imagine the imperial physician meticulously grinding herbs, preparing a poultice, all designed to coax your recalcitrant mind into slumber. One mainstream historical fact is that Galen meticulously documented his observations and treatments, producing an enormous body of work that became the foundation of medical education for centuries. His writings covered everything from anatomy to pharmacology, and within them, he offered specific advice on hygiene, diet, and even emotional regulation, all of which he believed impacted sleep. His influence was so pervasive that to question Galen was almost to question the very fabric of medical understanding in his time. A quirky tidbit: Galen was also known for his belief in the therapeutic power of certain types of dreams. He thought that dreams could offer insights into the body's internal state, and that certain dream imagery might indicate humoral imbalances. So, if you were an insomniac emperor, Galen might not just ask about your waking hours, but also delve into the strange, sometimes unsettling, landscapes of your nightmares. "Tell me, Your Majesty," he might inquire, "did you dream of vast, churning seas last night? Or perhaps a dry, arid desert?" He would then use these dream interpretations to fine-tune his remedies. It's a blend of ancient psychology and medical theory that certainly sounds more intriguing than counting sheep. Historians still argue whether Galen's elaborate explanations for sleeplessness, while comprehensive, truly led to more effective treatments than simpler remedies. Was the complexity a sign of deeper understanding, or merely a reflection of the intellectual trends of his time? You, however, are simply hoping for a good night's rest, willing to try anything recommended by the most brilliant medical mind of the empire, even if it involves strange concoctions and discussions of your most peculiar dreams. You can almost feel the gentle hum of the palace, the distant sounds of night, as Galen's intricate theories weave a tapestry around your struggle for sleep. After the elaborate medical theories of Galen, you might find yourself turning to the philosophers, those who sought wisdom not in humors and herbs, but in the realm of the mind itself. For a Roman emperor grappling with insomnia, the Stoic philosophers offered a particular brand of solace, focusing on mental tranquility as the path to peace. Imagine yourself, a weary ruler, sitting in a quiet chamber, perhaps with a scroll in hand, pondering the words of Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, trying to quiet the ceaseless chatter of your own thoughts. Stoicism, a school of thought that flourished in ancient Greece and Rome, taught that while you can't control external events, you can control your reactions to them. This was a powerful message for an emperor whose life was a constant whirlwind of political intrigue, military campaigns, and the crushing weight of responsibility. If your sleep was disturbed by anxieties over a rebellious province or a scheming senator, a Stoic might advise you to focus on what was within your power to change and calmly accept what was not. You are disturbed by things outside you. A Stoic might gently remind you, but those things are not what trouble you, it is your judgment about them. It sounds wonderfully simple, doesn't it? Just stop worrying. If only it were that easy. The Stoics emphasized the importance of virtue, reason, and self-discipline. For an insomniac emperor, this meant cultivating a mindset that was unperturbed by the vagaries of fortune. They might encourage you to reflect on the transient nature of power, the fleetingness of life, and the ultimate insignificance of worldly worries in the grand scheme of the cosmos. It was less about counting sheep and more about counting your blessings, or perhaps counting your philosophical arguments. This intellectual exercise, if pursued diligently, was believed to lead to ataraxia, a state of serene calmness and freedom from disturbance. One mainstream historical fact is that Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor himself, was a devout Stoic. His personal reflections, compiled in Meditations, offer a profound insight into how a man at the pinnacle of power wrestled with life's challenges, including the need for inner peace. You can almost picture him, late at night, penning these thoughts by the flickering light of an oil lamp, seeking solace from the demands of his office. His writings often touch upon themes of acceptance, duty, and the fleeting nature of earthly concerns, all designed to calm the mind and prepare it for rest. A quirky tidbit: while Stoicism advocated for emotional detachment, it didn't mean denying emotions altogether, but rather not letting them control you. So, An emperor might have used stoic exercises before bed, perhaps contemplating death not as a frightening end, but as a natural part of the cycle of life, a concept intended to bring a certain kind of peace. You could leave life right now, Marcus Aurelius famously wrote. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not exactly a lullaby, is it? But for some, this stark reality could be profoundly liberating, stripping away the anxieties that clung to worldly desires and thus aiding sleep. Historians still argue whether the rigorous intellectual demands of Stoicism might have sometimes exacerbated insomnia for some, rather than alleviating it. Was the constant self-examination and rationalization always conducive to relaxation, or could it lead to a different kind of mental agitation? You, however, are now attempting to calm your imperial mind, reflecting on the impermanence of all things, hoping that the quiet contemplation of philosophical truths will finally lull you into a deep, dreamless slumber. The weight of the empire, once a heavy cloak, now feels, for a precious few moments, like a light, almost ethereal mist. You've tried philosophy, you've tried peculiar diets, and you've even endured the invigorating plunge of the frigidarium. But what about the world outside your imperial bedroom? For Roman emperors, the very soundscapes of Rome could be a relentless enemy to peaceful slumber. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer, unadulterated cacophony that must have assaulted the ears, even within the thick walls of the Palatine Hill. Rome, even at night, was far from silent. You might think that once the sun set, the city would settle into a hushed stillness, but you'd be mistaken. The narrow, winding streets, paved with rough stone, amplified every clip-clop of a horse's hoof, every rumble of a cartwheel. And these weren't your modern, quiet rubber tires. These were heavy, wooden wheels on uneven surfaces, often carrying enormous loads. Imagine the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a cart, drawing ever closer, then receding, only to be replaced by another. This was the city's lifeblood, often restricted to night travel to avoid daytime congestion, meaning the noise intensified just as you were trying to drift off. Beyond the relentless cart traffic, there was the human element. Rome was a city of millions, bustling and vibrant. Even after dark, you'd hear the distant shouts of late-night revelers from the taverns, the occasional barking of dogs, the plaintive cries of vendors trying to sell their last wares, and perhaps even the mournful strains of a street musician. If a major public event, like a gladiatorial game or a triumphal procession, was scheduled for the next day, you might hear the preparations well into the night, the hammering, the drilling, the general clamor of thousands of people getting ready. It's enough to make you long for the gentle hum of a modern air conditioner, isn't it? One mainstream historical fact is that public notices and proclamations were often read aloud in the forum at various times of the day and night. Imagine an imperial herald, with a booming voice, standing in the middle of the city, reading out new edicts or news from the provinces. Even if your palace was somewhat removed, the sounds would carry a constant reminder of the empire's demands. For an emperor trying to unwind, this could be less like a soothing bedtime story and more like an unwelcome, official alarm clock. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to employ sleep watchers or highly specialized guards whose sole job it was to try and identify and mitigate sources of noise around the imperial palace. This wasn't just about security, it was about trying to enforce a bubble of silence. Imagine a hushed, shadowy figure, tiptoeing through the palace grounds, shushing servants, perhaps even discreetly paying off particularly loud street vendors to move their operations further away. It's almost comical, the image of an imperial functionary trying to negotiate with a stubborn mule driver in the dead of night, all for the sake of the emperor's precious sleep. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite truly suffered from chronic sleep deprivation due to noise, or if they simply became accustomed to the city's constant hum, much like city dwellers today. Was it a constant irritation, or just the background noise of life? You, however, are now acutely aware of every creak, every distant shout, every hoofbeat, as you lie in your imperial bed, hoping against hope that the bustling heart of Rome will finally quiet down, just for a few precious hours, allowing you to descend into peaceful oblivion. The sounds of the city, once merely background, now seem to conspire against your fragile attempts at slumber. With the city's relentless symphony still echoing in your ears, You might have sought refuge from insomnia, not in quiet contemplation or medical remedies, but in the realm of imperial diversions. For a Roman emperor, entertainment wasn't just a pastime. It could be a deliberate strategy to exhaust the mind and body, a sort of pre-sleep fatigue. Imagine the spectacle, the noise, the sheer mental bandwidth required to process a full day of games, banquets, or performances, all designed to distract you from the worries that clung to your consciousness. Think of the chariot races in the Circus Maximus. You're not just a passive observer. You're the emperor, expected to show enthusiasm, to cheer, to place bets, even if symbolic ones, and to be seen engaging with the populace. The thundering hooves, the roar of the crowd, the dramatic crashes, it's an adrenaline-fueled sensory overload. Such intense engagement could certainly leave you physically and mentally drained, theoretically making sleep a more inviting prospect. It's a bit like us watching a particularly intense sporting event or a thrilling movie before bed, hoping our brains will be too tired to resist slumber. Beyond the races, there were the gladiatorial games in the Colosseum, a spectacle of blood and skill. While we might find the violence disturbing, for Romans, it was a profound form of entertainment, a testament to courage and martial prowess. Witnessing such raw drama, the tension, the triumphs, and the defeats, could be emotionally taxing. After hours of such an event, you might feel a profound sense of exhaustion, a weary resignation that would ideally lead to a deep, dreamless sleep. Or, perhaps, it would lead to a night of vivid nightmares about sand and steel. Hard to say. One mainstream historical fact is that emperors often hosted lavish banquets and symposia, drinking parties, that extended well into the night. These weren't just about food. They were elaborate social events, often featuring poets, musicians, dancers, and philosophers. The constant stimulation of conversation, performance, and heavy drinking was another form of diversion, designed to keep the mind occupied and away from troublesome thoughts. You'd be expected to engage, to witty banter, to manage your guests, all while trying not to fall asleep in your wine. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to commission private theatrical performances or readings in their own palaces late into the evening. Imagine a group of actors performing a comedy or a dramatic tragedy specifically for you, the emperor, in a quiet wing of the palace. It was a more intimate form of diversion, but still designed to engage the mind and spirit until fatigue simply took over. It sounds rather nice, doesn't it? A personalized bedtime story, perhaps with a dramatic twist. Historians still argue whether such intense mental engagement before bed was truly effective for long-term sleep, or if it merely delayed the inevitable confrontation with a restless mind. Was it a genuine cure, or just kicking the insomnia can down the road? You, however, are now thoroughly immersed in the Roman world of entertainment, hoping that the sheer spectacle and mental exhaustion will finally coax your stubborn brain into a deep, well-deserved slumber. You can almost feel the roar of the crowd, the music, and the intellectual stimulation fading into a gentle hum as you finally close your eyes. If dazzling diversions failed to lull you to sleep, perhaps a more natural approach was needed. This brings us to the herbal remedies of ancient Rome, a fascinating world where the line between medicine, magic, and common sense often blurred. For an emperor battling insomnia, the palace physicians and household slaves would turn to the bounty of the earth, concocting various potions and poultices designed to usher in slumber. Imagine the subtle aromas of dried herbs, the gentle clinking of pestle on mortar, as these ancient pharmacists prepared your nightly draft. The Romans had a vast knowledge of plants, much of it inherited from Greek and Egyptian traditions, but also accumulated through their own observations and conquests. They understood that certain plants possessed properties that could soothe, sedate, or even induce a narcotic effect. For sleeplessness, one of the most commonly cited remedies was poppy, Papaver somniferum. You might remember this from our earlier mention of the emperor's poppy seed milk. The milky sap of the poppy contains opium, a powerful sedative. It was often prepared as a liquid extract or infused into wine, offering a potent, if risky, path to unconsciousness. Imagine a tiny vial of dark, viscous liquid, handed to you with a solemn nod, promising oblivion. Beyond the more potent opiates, a variety of gentler herbs were employed. Lettuce, surprisingly, was a popular choice. The Romans believed that a specific kind of wild lettuce contained sedative properties, and they would often eat large quantities of it before bed. It sounds rather healthy, doesn't it? A leafy green pathway to dreamland. Another common remedy was valerian root, an herb still used today for its calming effects. It would be dried, crushed, and often steeped into a tea or mixed with honey. You can almost taste the earthy, slightly bitter brew, hoping each sip brings you closer to repose. One mainstream historical fact is that Dioscorides, a Greek physician, pharmacologist, and botanist who served in Nero's army, compiled De Materia Medica, a massive 5-volume encyclopedia detailing the properties of over 600 plants and their medicinal uses. This work became the definitive pharmacological text for over 1,500 years and was a primary reference for Roman physicians treating insomnia. It was essentially their ancient Google for herbal remedies, meticulously detailing how to prepare and administer everything from poppy to mandrake. A quirky tidbit: sometimes, the Romans would also employ aromatic herbs and flowers placed near the bed or burned as incense to create a calming atmosphere. Lavender, rose petals, and chamomile were often used for their soothing scents, believed to relax the mind and body. It's less about ingesting a potent drug and more about creating a sleep-friendly environment, a concept we still embrace today. Imagine the gentle fragrance of lavender wafting through your imperial bedchamber, a delicate, natural perfume designed solely for your slumber. Historians still argue whether the Roman use of certain potent herbs, particularly poppy, often led to dependency or accidental overdose, given the imprecise measurements and understanding of dosages at the time. Was the cure sometimes more dangerous than the affliction? You, however, are now contemplating the array of natural remedies, perhaps preferring the gentle aroma of lavender to the potent promise of poppy, hoping that the subtle power of plants will finally ease your restless mind into the quiet depths of sleep. The rustle of dried leaves, the gentle scent of herbs, all whisper promises of peace. You've indulged in imperial feasts, soothed yourself in luxurious baths, consulted the learned Galen, pondered Stoic philosophy, battled the city's noise, and even sipped on herbal concoctions. Yet, for an emperor, another silent competitor for sleep often arose: the stark contrast between your own restless nights and the seemingly effortless slumber of your military marches. Soldiers, after a grueling day of training or campaigning, often found sleep quickly, a stark reminder of the difference between physical exhaustion and mental torment. Imagine, for a moment, the legions. You're not one of them, of course, but you can envision their daily lives. They rise with the sun, sometimes even before it, to begin their arduous duties. They march for miles, burdened by heavy armor and equipment, through varied terrain, dusty roads, muddy tracks, even across rivers. They dig trenches, build temporary camps, practice drills, and stand guard. Their bodies are pushed to their absolute limits, day in and day out. When evening finally arrives, they might share a simple meal, perhaps a bit of hardtack and watered wine, then collapse onto a rough bedroll, often with nothing more than their cloaks for warmth. For these soldiers, sleep wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, a biological imperative to recover from the physical demands placed upon them. Their minds, though perhaps filled with thoughts of home or the next battle, were often overridden by the sheer, overwhelming fatigue of their bodies. They might have fallen asleep to the sounds of their comrades snoring, the distant hoot of an owl, or the gentle crackle of a campfire, a very different symphony from the imperial palace. This profound physical exhaustion often acted as a powerful sedative, granting them a sleep that an emperor, despite all his comforts, might desperately envy. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman military camps were meticulously organized and highly disciplined. Even after a long day of marching, soldiers would be expected to help construct a fortified camp, complete with ditches, ramparts, and internal pathways. This communal effort, followed by simple rations, would ensure that when they finally lay down, their bodies were primed for immediate and deep rest. It was a rigorous, demanding life, but one that perhaps inadvertently offered the gift of uncomplicated sleep. A quirky tidbit: some Roman military manuals even contained advice on how to choose good sleeping spots within the camp, or how to arrange tents to minimize disruptions from passing patrols or animal noises. While not explicitly for inducing sleep, these practical considerations highlight the understanding that environment played a role in obtaining rest, even for the most hardened soldiers. Imagine a grizzled centurion meticulously positioning his tent to avoid the draft or the lingering scent of cooking fires, all to ensure a slightly better night's rest for his men. Historians still argue whether the stark simplicity of a soldier's life, devoid of imperial anxieties and lavish comforts, truly translated into more restful sleep than that of the Roman elite. Was the freedom from political stress more conducive to slumber than the physical demands of military life? You, however, are now left to ponder this contrast, stretched out on your silken mattress, listening to the almost imperceptible whispers of the palace, wondering if a day spent digging ditches might offer a more reliable path to sleep than a lifetime of ruling an empire. The image of a weary soldier, instantly asleep, becomes a peculiar, almost mocking, vision in your insomniac mind. The thought of a soldier's simple, exhausted slumber might be a fleeting comfort, but for you, the Roman emperor, the true battle against insomnia often raged within the opulent, yet often suffocating, walls of your own palace. Here, the very air was thick with palace intrigue, a silent, insidious enemy that fed your sleeplessness. Imagine the constant whispers, the veiled glances, the subtle shifts in loyalty that could unravel your empire, and indeed, your peace of mind, with devastating speed. Every decision you made, every favor granted, every slight perceived, could spark a new conspiracy. You slept, or tried to sleep, knowing that ambitious senators, jealous family members, or even your seemingly loyal Praetorian Guard might be plotting your downfall. The very food you ate, the wine you drank, the clothes you wore, each could be a vehicle for poison. Trust was a rare and precious commodity, and often a dangerous one. This constant vigilance, this pervasive paranoia, was a direct pipeline to sleepless nights. Your mind, far from relaxing, would be replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, and anticipating threats, a mental chess game that never truly ended. The burdens of empire were immense. The sheer administrative weight of governing vast territories, managing countless legions, ensuring the grain supply, and maintaining public order was enough to keep any mind churning long after the sun had set. Every day brought new petitions, new rebellions, new economic crises. It was a pressure cooker, and you were at its very center, with no true escape. One mainstream historical fact is that numerous Roman emperors met violent ends, often at the hands of those closest to them. The assassinations of figures like Julius Caesar, Caligula, Nero, and Domitian highlight the very real dangers that constantly loomed over the imperial throne. This wasn't abstract fear. It was a daily reality, a knowledge that your very life was always on the line. How could you truly relax when a trusted confidant might be sharpening a dagger behind your back? A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to have elaborate security measures within their own private apartments, beyond just guards. This could include secret passages, hidden alarm systems, perhaps involving ropes and bells, an ancient version of a panic button, or even sleeping in different rooms on different nights to make it harder for assassins to track them. Imagine lying in your bed, listening for any unusual sound, knowing that your very survival depended on eternal vigilance. It makes our modern security cameras seem delightfully quaint, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the constant threat of assassination and intrigue led to genuine, widespread chronic insomnia among emperors, or if some were simply more prone to anxiety regardless of their position. Was it the crown that bred the sleeplessness, or did those already prone to anxiety simply find their worst fears amplified by the throne? You, however, are now acutely aware of every creak in the floor, every distant murmur, every shadow that dances in the moonlight. The weight of the world, and the fear of losing it, presses down on you, ensuring that the peace of slumber remains, frustratingly, just out of reach. The palace, once a symbol of security, now feels like a gilded cage for your restless mind. The specter of palace intrigue and the weight of empire were certainly enough to keep any emperor awake. But for Romans, the night also brought another, perhaps even more unsettling, source of anxiety. dream divination. Imagine lying in your bed, finally drifting off, only to be plunged into vivid, sometimes terrifying dreams. For the Romans, these weren't just random neurological firings. They were often seen as omens, portents from the gods, or warnings from the underworld. And for an emperor, such nocturnal visions could carry immense weight, demanding interpretation and, perhaps, even action. You might wake in a cold sweat, recalling a dream of a crumbling statue, a black bird flying into your palace, or a strange, ominous beast. In modern times, you might dismiss it as indigestion or stress. But in ancient Rome, such dreams could be considered direct communications from the divine. The very peace of your slumber was therefore intertwined with the symbolic language of your subconscious. This added a layer of dread to bedtime, as you hoped for tranquil, pleasant dreams, but feared those that might hint at rebellion, betrayal, or even your own demise. The Romans had a deep belief in the significance of dreams. There were professional oniromancers, or dream interpreters, consulted by individuals from all social strata, including the emperors. These specialists would use various techniques, sometimes drawing from established dream dictionaries or common symbolic interpretations, to unravel the meaning of your unsettling visions. Imagine a solemn figure, summoned to your bedchamber in the pre-dawn hours, listening intently to your recounted nightmare, then offering a cryptic explanation that might either soothe your fears or deepen them. One mainstream historical fact is that Artemidorus of Daldis wrote Oniricritica, the interpretation of dreams, in the 2nd century AD, a comprehensive guide to dream interpretation that became immensely popular. This work categorized dreams and offered detailed explanations of their symbolic meanings, influencing generations of Roman dream interpreters. It was essentially their ancient equivalent of a Freudian analysis, but with more emphasis on predicting the future than on understanding the psyche. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to intentionally try to induce certain types of dreams, or to perform rituals before bed to ensure propitious visions. This might involve sleeping in a specific temple, making offerings to certain gods associated with dreams, or even consuming mild hallucinogenic plants, though this was rare and risky, to gain divine insight. Imagine the emperor, desperate for guidance, carefully arranging his sleep to coax a helpful message from the dream world, hoping for a dream of victory rather than one of defeat. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in dream divination genuinely contributed to increased anxiety among Roman emperors, or if it simply provided a framework for processing pre-existing worries and anxieties. Was it a source of comfort through supposed divine guidance, or another layer of mental burden on an already stressed ruler? You, however, are now left to ponder the unsettling power of your own dreams, hoping that tonight's visions will be filled with pastoral scenes and triumphs, rather than the ominous symbols that might demand another consultation with a nervous oniromancer. The quiet darkness of your room feels pregnant with possibility, both for rest and for unsettling revelations. You've battled the mental anguish of palace intrigue and the unsettling mysteries of dreams. But even if your mind was momentarily at peace, the physical realities of imperial travel could utterly dismantle any hope of consistent, restful sleep. Imagine, for a moment, an emperor on the move, leading a campaign or conducting an inspection of distant provinces. Your grand palace and its carefully curated quietude are far behind you, replaced by the jarring rhythms of the road. Roman roads, while marvels of engineering, were not exactly velvet carpets. You'd be traveling in a carpentum or a reta, a type of wheeled carriage, often without the sophisticated suspension systems we take for granted today. Imagine the constant jostling, the bumps and shakes as your carriage rumbled over uneven surfaces, through dusty plains or rocky mountain passes. Every rut, every stone, would transmit a jolt directly to your imperial backside. Trying to nap in such conditions would be less like gentle rocking and more like a continuous, low-grade earthquake. You'd be perpetually braced, your muscles tensed, rather than relaxed and ready for sleep. Travel, especially for an emperor, wasn't a quick dash. Journeys could last for days, weeks, or even months. You'd be stopping at various mansions, official roadside inns, or staying in provincial villas, none of which offered the familiar comforts and security of your own palace. The beds might be less comfortable, the rooms less quiet, and the constant awareness of being away from your most secure stronghold would gnaw at the edges of your mind. There's nothing quite like sleeping in an unfamiliar place to trigger a touch of anxiety, is there? One mainstream historical fact is that Roman emperors often undertook extensive travels, not just for military campaigns, but also for administrative reasons, to show themselves to the populace, or to oversee construction projects. Hadrian, for example, was famous for his extensive travels across the empire, personally inspecting borders and public works. While these journeys were vital for governance, they certainly presented challenges for maintaining a consistent sleep schedule and finding truly restorative rest. You can almost feel the aches and pains from a full day in a carriage, the dust clinging to your robes. A quirky tidbit: some emperors were known to have specially designed travel beds or reclining couches built into their carriages, hoping to grab some moments of rest while on the move. These were often heavily padded and sometimes had elaborate curtains to offer a semblance of privacy and darkness. Imagine the imperial carpenter meticulously crafting a miniature bedroom on wheels, trying to engineer comfort out of chaos. It's a testament to their desperation for sleep that they would go to such lengths, only to find the roads of Rome still unforgiving. Historians still argue whether the constant disruption of imperial travel led to chronic sleep deprivation for emperors, or if their robust constitutions and access to special amenities allowed them to adapt more easily. Was the exhaustion of travel a genuine impediment to sleep, or simply another discomfort to be endured? You, however, are now experiencing the wearying reality of life on the Roman road, yearning for the stillness of your bedchamber, hoping that the exhaustion of the journey will eventually overpower the discomfort, allowing you to finally fall into a deep, uninterrupted slumber, even if it's just for a few hours in a rattling carriage. The relentless rhythm of the road seems to mock your desire for peace. You've endured the jarring realities of imperial travel, seeking sleep where you could find it. Now, let's return to the imperial residence itself, where the very design of your abode could either be a silent ally or a subtle enemy in your quest for rest. This brings us to the realm of architectural design and how Roman palaces were built, or sometimes not built, for serene sleep. Imagine the sprawling complexes, their grandeur meant to awe and impress, but perhaps not always to soothe your weary mind. A Roman palace, especially an imperial one like the Domus Aurea or Hadrian's Villa, was a vast, multi-purpose structure. It wasn't just a residence, it was an administrative center, a place for audiences, banquets, and political machinations. This meant that while there might be private sleeping quarters, they were often embedded within a bustling, active complex. You might have had slaves and servants moving about at all hours, the distant sounds of palace business, or even the chatter from a late-night feast in a nearby hall. It was a constant hum of activity that could permeate even the most secluded corners. However, the Romans also understood the concept of privacy and quiet to some extent. Imperial sleeping quarters, or cubicula, were often located in quieter wings of the palace, perhaps facing away from major courtyards or busy thoroughfares. Walls might be thicker in these areas, designed to muffle sound. Windows, often smaller than those in public rooms, might be shuttered with heavy wood or covered with thick drapes, aiding in light control. It was a conscious effort to create a cocoon of quiet, even if the surrounding palace continued its ceaseless rhythm. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman architecture employed sophisticated techniques for insulation and climate control. They used double walls, hollow spaces within walls, for air circulation, and even mosaic floors that could be heated by the hypocaust system we mentioned earlier. While primarily for warmth and coolness, these features also had the secondary benefit of soundproofing, making the cubicula more conducive to sleep. You can almost feel the reassuring solidity of those thick walls, designed to keep the world and its noise at bay. A quirky tidbit: some imperial residences were designed with specific napping rooms, or alcoves known as dietae, intended for short rests during the day. These were often smaller, more secluded spaces, sometimes even with a pleasant view of a garden or a fountain, designed for quick rejuvenation rather than full night's sleep. Imagine finding a small, hidden nook in your sprawling palace, away from the demands of empire, where you could steal a few precious moments of quiet rest. It's almost like the ultimate power nap station. Historians still argue whether the monumental scale and multifunctional nature of Roman imperial palaces inherently made consistent quiet sleep more difficult, or if the dedicated efforts to create insulated sleeping quarters largely mitigated these issues. Was the grandeur a sleep hindrance, or did careful design overcome it? You, however, are now navigating the vast halls of your imperial palace, seeking that perfect combination of seclusion and comfort, hoping that the very stones around you will absorb the world's anxieties and allow you to finally sink into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. The echoes of your footsteps on the polished marble seem to whisper promises of rest. You've explored the grand architectural solutions for sleep, but sometimes the quietest contributors to an emperor's rest weren't grand designs, but the very people who moved silently through the palace. This brings us to the crucial, often overlooked, role of slaves and servants in ensuring imperial comfort, particularly when it came to sleep. Imagine a network of dedicated individuals, their lives revolving around your well-being, tirelessly working to create an environment conducive to slumber. In a Roman imperial household, the sheer number of slaves and servants was astounding. These individuals weren't just for public display or heavy labor. Many were highly specialized, trained for specific roles that directly impacted the emperor's daily life, and especially his nights. There would be personal attendants, cubicularii, whose primary duty was to manage the emperor's bedchamber. Their tasks might include preparing the bed, ensuring the linens were fresh and soft, drawing the heavy curtains, and even tending to the oil lamps, ensuring they provided just the right amount of dim light or were extinguished completely at the right moment. It was a precise, meticulous art, all in service of your sleep. Beyond the immediate bedchamber staff, there was a wider retinue whose indirect actions fostered rest. You would have slaves dedicated to noise control, perhaps even those who would discreetly shush other palace staff or manage the flow of traffic in the nearby corridors. Others might be responsible for maintaining the temperature of the room, ensuring braziers provided warmth in winter or that cooling breezes flowed through in summer. Imagine the subtle rustle of a fan, gently moved by a slave, creating a faint, rhythmic sound designed to lull you into unconsciousness. One mainstream historical fact is that Roman slavery was widespread and integral to every aspect of society, from agriculture to intellectual pursuits. While often brutal, some household slaves, particularly those in positions of trust within elite families, could wield significant influence and live lives that, while not free, were certainly more comfortable than those of their counterparts in mines or galleys. Their role in the emperor's personal comfort, including his sleep, highlights their intimate proximity to power. A quirky tidbit: some imperial households even employed storytellers or readers, usually educated slaves, whose job it was to read aloud to the emperor until he fell asleep. Imagine a soft, melodious voice, reciting epic poems or historical tales, the narrative slowly fading into a gentle murmur as your consciousness drifted away. It was a personalized, ancient version of an audiobook, designed not for entertainment, but for inducing slumber through the hypnotic rhythm of spoken words. Historians still argue whether these storytellers truly possessed a unique ability to lull their masters to sleep, or if their presence was merely a comforting ritual that reinforced the illusion of control over one's rest. Was it the story, or the soothing presence, that made the difference? You, however, are now surrounded by the subtle, silent dedication of your servants, each playing their part in the intricate ballet of imperial comfort, hoping their quiet diligence will finally grant you the elusive gift of sleep. The air is still, the light is dim, and the gentle whispers of the palace fade into the promise of oblivion. You've journeyed through the labyrinth of an emperor's sleepless nights, from the lavish banquets to the subtle power of devoted servants. As we approach the gentle close of our story, let's consider the legacy of sleep from ancient Rome and how the lessons learned, or sometimes simply endured, by emperors still echo in our own pursuit of rest. Imagine the final moments of night in an imperial bedchamber, the first faint light of dawn just beginning to touch the distant peaks of the Alban Hills. The Romans, despite their vast empire and technological prowess, fundamentally understood that sleep was an essential, yet often elusive, human need. Their various attempts to secure it, through diet, baths, philosophy, environmental control, and even the labor of others, speak to a universal struggle. They may not have had melatonin supplements or sleep apps, but they intuitively grasped that a combination of physical comfort, mental peace, and environmental factors played a crucial role in obtaining restorative slumber. Perhaps the most significant legacy is the understanding that no amount of power or wealth can truly command sleep. An emperor, with all the resources of the known world at his disposal, could still lie awake, tormented by worries, indigestion, or the distant sounds of his bustling city. This humbling truth transcends eras. It's a reminder that sleep remains a democratic force, often granted to the physically exhausted laborer more readily than to the burdened mind of a ruler. You can almost feel the quiet resignation of an emperor who, after a long night of tossing and turning, finally accepts that sleep, like fate, has its own timetable. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this legacy is the Roman emphasis on a structured daily routine, or cursus honorum, which included periods for rest and leisure, even if imperfectly followed by emperors. This recognition of the need for balance, even within a demanding life, hints at an underlying understanding of health and well-being that included recuperation. While the emperors often broke these rules, the rules themselves reflected a societal ideal of a life that wasn't entirely consumed by work. A quirky tidbit that ties into their legacy of understanding sleep, however indirectly, is the Roman fondness for elaborate funerary practices and the concept of eternal sleep in the afterlife. While not a direct sleep aid, it shows a deep cultural preoccupation with the state of rest and peace. They envision the afterlife as a profound, undisturbed slumber, a peace that perhaps many living emperors desperately craved. Imagine the irony, achieving perfect sleep only after life itself had ceased. Historians still argue whether the Roman experiences with insomnia and their various remedies truly advanced the scientific understanding of sleep, or if their practices were mostly trial-and-error ritualistic attempts. Were they truly on the path to modern sleep science, or were they simply engaging in elaborate wishful thinking? You, however, have now observed the quiet dignity, and sometimes the quiet desperation, of those who sought to master their own nights. The lessons are clear. Cultivate peace of mind, attend to your physical state, and create a tranquil environment. And sometimes, despite all best efforts, accept that sleep will arrive when it's ready, a final act of gentle surrender. The first rays of sunlight now paint the sky in soft hues of rose and gold, filtering gently into your imperial bedchamber. The sounds of Rome are beginning to stir again, but they seem softer now, muted by the lingering embrace of the night. Your breath is steady, your muscles relaxed, and the worries of the empire feel distant, like echoes from a dream. You are no longer grappling with insomnia, but simply existing in this quiet, peaceful space between night and morning. The world can wait. For now, there is only the gentle stillness and the promise of another peaceful day.